to the Time Variance Authority. I'm Miss Minutes, and it's my job to catch you up before you stand trial for your crimes. So let's not waste another minute. Settle in, sharpen your pencils, and check this out.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, is the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's the end of the week. I'm tired, but I'm expecting this conversation to liven me up a little bit because I know it's one that you've been waiting for quite some time. In fact, it might even be the reason you wanted to do the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
No, it's not even in question. I committed to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in order to talk about the Loki series. And I have to admit that it's been actually a really enjoyable series of conversations.
Yeah.
I can't, of course, speak for the listeners, but I've had a great time talking about Marvel movies and starting from the beginning and discovering so many wonderful, thoughtful and interesting components of the character and story psychology. So, it's actually been kind of surprisingly engaging.
Well, we've had a number of listeners agree with you. They have sent us several tweets and emails and Facebook messages, and folks on Patreon seem to really like it. So I think they're having a good time. I'm having a good time. We're doing something a little interesting. We are creating our own time variance here because we have been going in order, but now we're basically taking one of the final stories and really the launching off point for the next phase of the MCU. And we're going ahead and we're slapping it right here after phase one, after the Avengers, because that is where this character picks up. So it's very important that everyone realize the Loki that Drea will continue to talk about in future episodes kind of has nothing to do with this one. This is a whole unique version of Loki who maybe comes to terms with himself earlier than other incarnations. We will learn more about those as we move forward. But right now, we are talking about a variant. What is a variant, Drea?
As I understand it, a variant is one unique version of a person in the multiple Marvel narratives and universes.
Yeah, the multiverse.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a character who has been identified by the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, as a being out of time, a being that did something that splintered off the timeline, and now the TVA will inevitably hunt that variant down and, for lack of a better word, destroy it so that it doesn't continue to branch off the timeline.
It's a threatening, in this narrative, it's a threatening individual that if they don't prune these individual chaotic abnormal individuals, that there could be catastrophic outcomes, that this is something that is a systemic, almost an oppressive act that takes place to find, locate, exterminate, persecute these individual variants, and to essentially make the timeline pure.
Right. Now, you say that they're a threat. We learn over the course of this series that it's possible they're not threats at all. Mm-hmm. They are simply variations on a timeline. And that timeline branching out ultimately may be a threat to the universe, as we learn a little bit later on in the series. Let's be honest, in the finale of the series. And so what they're really trying to do is, you used the word prune. They're trying to prune those branches. They're trying to prevent the branches from ultimately creating a mess, an entanglement that can't be undone, because presumably someone has already done this in the past. And our proxy, oddly enough, for this story is Loki. Loki, and it's very important, Loki Laufeyson is our proxy. Up to this point, we have known Loki as the betraying, villainous brother of Thor, adopted son of Odin, true son of Laufey, the frost giant, and he has betrayed Asgard. He has joined forces with a nefarious group of Chitauri in order to obtain the cosmic cube, the Tesseract, so that another being off-world somewhere can have it and take over the universe, thus granting Loki dominion over the Earth. And he loses that battle with the Avengers, including his brother Thor. And now we pick up, as Loki is being removed from Stark Tower, he comes across a number of things that happen. These things we can't really talk about right now because these things happen actually much later. But a number of events happen, which then places the cosmic cube, the Tesseract, right there at his feet. He then uses that to escape time, this timeline. He leaves, and thus he creates the branch that we learn about here with the TVA going to capture him. They do so pretty easily, I might add. It's not a difficult feat for them. And they bring him back to their reality, where we learn from a number of characters, including a character played by Owen Wilson, Mobius M. Mobius, who is an agent of the TVA, that actually there have been many, many Lokis over the history of the universe, and they all seem to be troublesome. They all seem to create variations in the timeline through one nefarious deed or another, and this is just one more of them, and he will be pruned like any other.
So he has a reputation as a Loki of being mischievous, of breaking rules, of being a nonconformist, of causing chaos. Like, already we get the sense that being a Loki it means you're an outsider.
Yeah.
It means that I think the bigger the bigger message of this too is there's the individual psychology of Loki, which we're definitely going to talk about.
Yeah.
The aspects of his narrative, right? Being rejected, not fitting in, not belonging, being kind of weird. That actually is the commonality across the different Lokis.
Yeah.
And they managed to kind of show us that the Loki community, the types of Lokis, if you're a Loki, you fit into this marginalized personhood.
Yeah, and it turns out that even though the Loki we know looks very highly upon himself, it turns out that yes, but
does he though?
He does have quite the ego. He believes that it's adorable that they think they can capture him, and they do so easily. It turns out that Lokis throughout the existence of the TVA have really been more of an annoyance than anything else.
Yeah.
They're not difficult to capture, and it's really their own ego that trips them up each and every time. It's their own sort of bumbling incompetence as villains that end up being their own downfall. In fact, it turns out it's not that difficult to catch a Loki. Should I say it? Except one. There's one Loki that has been difficult to catch. It's not this one because he was just caught. They recruit Loki to catch another variant that is going around time and hiding and killing a number of the TVA agents and causing trouble, because ultimately what the TVA does is whenever there's a variation in the timeline, their job is ultimately to correct it. They go in, they prune the offender, and then they reset the timeline. They put a little device down and it basically destroys the variation. So the branch disappears from their computer monitors. And it no longer exists. In fact, it resumes from where it had varied off. So you would never know that anything had happened. So there is one variant that is going around causing problems, and they cannot seem to find it. And it turns out that is also a Loki. And so they have taken the Loki we know, and rather than prune him, they have recruited him to help them because of the way that he thinks. They think that he might be able to help find this alternate Loki. Dre, let's talk about Mobius M. Mobius. I mentioned him just a moment ago. He's the agent who's basically been put in charge of this case, played in lovely fashion by Owen Wilson, and in really the only way that Owen Wilson can play a character. He has a little bit of I would say that he's a very competent agent, but he does have that Owen Wilson quality of being a little on the meek side. And we get to see a little of his lifestyle, about sort of how people are treated at the TVA. His boss is Ravonna Renslayer, and she seems to be a very powerful boss. She also seems to be a friend of his. And they have a long history together. But there is something about this character, and I'd like you to tell me what you saw in him, because you instantly feel for him. He seems to be the everyday working man at the TVA.
Well, I think he's relating to Loki in a way that is satisfying for us, right? He is recruiting Loki for a specific reason, but his ability to connect with Loki isn't superficial. Like, we get the sense that he's willing to be open and vulnerable with Loki, which isn't necessarily the smartest thing with someone like Loki, but he gets it. Mobius definitely understands. I mean, he's seen the timeline, right? He has the footage.
Yeah.
He knows what will be, or what had been.
Yeah.
So there is this, I would say, a level of emotional intelligence that he has, that he's willing to lead with. And I don't know, I wouldn't say it's manipulative, but he recruits Loki and gains Loki's involvement by appealing to Loki's emotions. Mm-hmm. You know, what would happen if you're not here, involved in this mission, given this purpose?
Yeah.
What is your purpose? And that's the core of the entire show. It's purpose.
Yeah.
A glorious purpose.
Now, I would place Mobius, as I was watching the series, tell me if you agree or disagree. To me, Mobius is the Phil Coulson of the TVA.
How so?
Well, in the same way that we related to Coulson simply as an everyday working man. He was an agent had a significant amount of competence, but at the same time could be a little bumbling, could be a pretty decent comic relief. But you also felt for him. Certainly when Coulson died, we understood that was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, if you've not seen the series, there's a moment in which Mobius finds himself pruned. And I would say in the exact same way, we felt like he had been betrayed. We felt for Mobius. For a TV series that's only 6 episodes, he was a character that was sort of injected into our hearts very quickly. We felt for him. We liked him. But I would also say that he was very good at his job. And so
Yeah.
I think he is the Phil Coulson. And he's sort of the fanboy. He knows a lot about Lokis. He enjoys going after Lokis. And Loki takes that as almost as if Mobius is honored to go after Loki. We actually find out that he's not really honored to go after Loki. It's just he finds them amusing in the same way that Coulson really idolized Captain America and other members of the Avengers.
I think that Mobius is also taking on the role of a mentor. Not in the sense of a particular teacher or instructor or anything like that, but more of a mentor for morality, a mentor for almost a personal coach, which is very much needed for Loki. You know, like who else is guiding him, trusting in him, who is cheerleading him and like just giving him, I don't know, like the Ted Lasso, I believe in you relationship.
Even though we find out occasionally that Ted Lasso-ish nature, it might be a little put on. It's like you said earlier, he's got a little bit of a manipulative side to his methods.
Yeah, it's operative. And yet I think there's a satisfying, fulfilling outcome for both of them, that they do develop a genuine friendship out of this. And when I say mentorship, I guess what I'm trying to say is that he knows that this is the kind of person who's going to push back. He can't be in a battle with him. I mean, there are some moments of tension and conflict, and they're not always on the same page, but he's got to have him on his side. Yeah. And so there has to be a level of belief in him. And I think for Loki, he hasn't really trusted anybody. He's trusted his brother Thor, but they both betray one another, Loki more so than Thor, and they don't have a healthy relationship. So this is really the first, this is the, I'd say, the framework for a somewhat, an approximation of a healthy relationship, at least one that Loki can explore that will help him feel affirmed and meaningful. And again, feel like, oh, I'm here to give some level of I'm here to contribute to something bigger, and it matters. It matters to me. It matters to them. The context too is he's held captive. He is forced to do this, and so there. I understand it that there's that tension there too. What choice does he really have?
And I would say that this is the first time in a really long time where Loki is put up against another character, a partner of sorts that he can respect on the grounds that he doesn't necessarily trust Mobius. He doesn't necessarily trust the TVA. When your brother is Thor, you know that Thor is always just going to be a bit egomaniacal, but at the same time, a paladin. He's going to be a good dude. He's going to do good things. He doesn't understand all the betrayals. Even when he's betrayed as often as he is, he still can't help but to love his brother. And this is a character who's not like that. This is a character who is willing to betray Loki just as often as Loki betrays anyone else. And so I think, although it's not in a as nefarious, I think Loki sees that. He sees that he's being used. He's trying to game the system, but he also realizes the system is gaming him. And I think that there is it's keeping Loki on his toes.
Yeah, and maybe that's why it works. It's saying, this is a system that you actually fit in with. Like, you have all...
You could be good at this.
Yeah, that's literally what he's told. You have all the different makings and characteristics of someone who can thrive in this system.
Yeah.
And you should expect that there are aspects of this system that lack truth, that are deceiving, that are... challenging, that aren't exactly predictable. And I think that this show, broadly speaking, is a huge comment about that psychology, right? That this whole discovery of this system, this whole time order is... I think it's meant to surprise us. It's meant to kind of shock us into realizing that there's this whole other way that the world works.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's also why we start to gain more sympathy for Loki.
Yeah. Let's talk about Mobius's boss, Ravonna Renslayer. She is a judge. She was formerly a hunter. Now she's a judge. What does it mean to have been a hunter? And why do we care about this particular character? Well, it turns out that she is the one who hunted down and arrested the variant they are looking for at one point in time before the variant escaped. So she has a very deep, personal, professional reason for wanting this particular variant to be recaptured and pruned. But Ravonna is she is very much that tough boss who certainly feels the pressure from the powers that be above her. We'll talk about them in a second. But she's also got a long history with Mobius. It seems that the two of them have definitely formed a very close relationship with one another over the eons that they've existed. And I think this is probably where we're going to spill the beans on the variant. But Drea, why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts of Ravonna Lexus Renslayer?
I don't have a ton to say about her, except that she's deeply involved, so personally involved in this work. It's almost as if she's burnt out from it to the point where she can't identify herself. She can't really define herself.
I would agree with that.
Outside of this role, she's been completely enmeshed with her job.
Yeah.
It's really relatable because when you're so enmeshed with your job, you begin to believe a lot about the system. You start to believe in some of the superficial messages that might be a part of that culture. You might be willing to step on others in order to advance and succeed.
Yeah.
You might lose a part of yourself. You might willingly let go parts of yourself in order to be successful and advance yourself in a system like this. And I see her as someone who's done that. And so she's sort of lost who she is and she's completely embedded in the work. And I think she's even seeing evidence that, there are cracks in this. Things aren't exactly how she was told they were.
But because of who she is and the fact that she is trapped in that, she is one of the people willing to not fix the cracks, but seal them up. She's the one willing to cover over them in order to keep the order.
And that's really relatable too, because to acknowledge the, I don't know, the failings, the flaws that you're participating in, or even any feeling of connection or understanding that you're participating in this oppression might be too overwhelming. You know, it's a feeling that she might be unable to tolerate. She's not ready for that. She's too in it. And so she just continues to stay in this narrow thinking.
Yeah.
And just continue to do her job with hopes that maybe it will amount to something.
Let's talk about why these characters have, as you say, lost themselves. It turns out, in a bit of, again, spoiler, that the beings at the TVA, who we are told were basically created and bred to have these jobs. These are people who have always existed in this place on this part of the timeline in order to do one thing, and that is the mission of keeping the timeline in order. Turns out these people are all former variants who have been arrested and had their minds erased, and they have become tools for those known as the timekeepers, in order to keep the timeline together. And that includes Ravonna. That also includes Mobius. These two were their own people back on Earth during some time period. And each one had some sort of moment that created a fracture in the timeline, and they were picked up, and this was done to them. They had their entire identities taken away from them. And that's basically the crack, Drea, that you're talking about, that she is actively trying to cover up. She knows there's something wrong with this. She knows that she is part of this system. She knows that the truth is that these people didn't come from here. But you can see that she is a bit, there's a war going on within her. Does she continue with her work and her job because she believes that the work is important? Or does she relate to these underlings who are now discovering that they've been basically kidnapped and brainwashed their entire lives? One of the reasons that Ravonna is so personally involved in this particular case is she is the one who, for lack of a better term, kidnapped the Loki variant that we become familiar with as Sylvie. It is a female Loki variant, Sylvie Laufeydotter. For starters, Drea, were you shocked at this? It's someone who doesn't really know much about the multiverse in Marvel. You're a DC gal. For someone who doesn't really know much about the multiverse in Marvel, were you shocked to see Sylvie Laufeydotter?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, we had already established variants, and so you sort of got the sense that this could be a Loki variant.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that, again, they kept these common features across all the Loki variants. And with Sylvie, you see those features as really positive things, as attributes.
Yeah.
She's very cunning. She's brilliant. She's an amazing fighter. Mm-hmm. She's knowledgeable in magic and in, the art of deception. So all these things have helped her actually to survive.
Yeah.
And she's probably, I can't speak for Loki Gator and some of the other variants, but she is uniquely a survivor, right? She is incredibly resilient. She spent most of her life escaping the TVA.
Yeah.
And so is almost defined as somebody who is constantly on the run, has to think on her feet, is a loner, is somebody who doesn't really have community or family. And of course, that takes a toll on her.
And we learned that she was taken at a very young age. I mean, she was a young a young girl when she supposedly fractured the timeline and was arrested by Ravonna, who was a hunter at the time. This is a really big deal because suddenly she was taken away from everything she's ever known. She's taken away from her family. She's taken away from her brother. She's taken away from the life that she was living. She had no idea that what she was doing was wrong. And then she is essentially being taken to be pruned, and she escapes. And then, like you said, she has now lived her entire life growing up escaping the TVA. But she's now got a very specific plan. She's not just trying to live out the remainder of her days escaping the TVA. She wants to go find the powers that be, and she wants to kill them for having robbed her of her entire life.
And it seems reasonable. It's not an overreaction.
Right.
I think this is why a lot of people, myself included, felt that this show was powerful, like had a powerful impact on us. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think for a lot of people, they wanted Loki's story in the sense that they wanted more time with him. They wanted him to have a chance for redemption. They wanted to just kind of see a more dimensional Loki, and we definitely got that. But another thing that I think from the perspective that I have about this is, this is a simplification, but a lot of us see ourselves as a Loki, and some people see themselves more like Thor. So maybe people listening to this feel like, yeah, I tend to be very shameful, or I have self-doubts, or people are disappointed by me. I try to commit, and I have setbacks. I'm a work in progress. Other people may think they're more like Thor, and there's a Loki in their life, right? Somebody keeps disappointing me, hurting me. They're unreliable. They're unpredictable. They are deceitful. I can't trust them. Mm-hmm. And for the Thors out there, this is also, I think, fulfilling for them. I realize there's more going on there. It's not just that they sabotage our relationship.
Yeah.
It's not just that they have a disorder. It's not just that they've had trauma. It's that they're constantly in conflict. There's this instability within them, this dysregulation that makes it difficult for them to manage relationships. Mm-hmm. But through the experience of trust, of connection, of being able to try again, that whole falling down and getting up that all of us need, okay, there's some progress there. And I think that's really fulfilling no matter where you're coming from. The other thing too about this show is that when you talked about Sylvie, I kept thinking there was something you said about, she's really not at fault.
No.
She didn't do anything wrong. And I think a lot of people relate to variants in the show because they feel like just their existence makes people want to marginalize them or persecute them or prune them, right? You can't be here. You're not fitting into this society. You're not doing things the way we want you to. You're not the version that we want.
Yeah.
And so when you look at Sylvie's character, that gives us so many opportunities to then talk about gender, to talk about neurodivergence, to talk about all different ways, all different communities and situations where people do feel that just existing means that they're unwelcome in the timeline, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's a very powerful, Sylvie's story alone is a very powerful one.
Yeah, I agree. And she brings out something in Loki that I think is important that we talk about. Again, up to this point, Loki has been all about himself. He took a great offense to finding out that he was adopted after having spent many years in the shadow of his brother. Now he realizes that there was really nothing he could have done his entire life to have truly won over his own father. There was just no chance that he was going to earn the love that Thor received from Odin. And Loki then took it upon himself to betray Asgard and go up against the only life that he had really ever known. This was basically an attempt to avenge the wrongs done to himself. Now he's meeting a character who is essentially him, but has lived an entirely different life from a very young age. And it's really no longer about the wrongs that her family did to her, if you could call them that, because she found out that she was adopted at a young age. This is really about the wrongs the universe has done to her. So he is now seeing a much bigger picture of what it means to be a Loki. This is a relationship that spawned a lot of both love and hatred online.
There's some controversy. What is your kind of takeaway from the controversy?
So here's the deal. Here's why it was so controversial. Over the course of the episodes in which Loki and Lady Loki, Sylvie, get to know one another, they start out very untrusting, as of course you would if you're meeting another Loki. And over the course of time, you get a real sense that not only do they respect one another, but they need one another. And you might even call it falling in love with one another.
I mean, it's there again, not a question for me. It was pretty clear that they were romantically connected.
Yeah, I mean, they did everything they could to not push us. I mean, it's not like we were watching a lot of goo goo eyes and kissing right off the bat. Like we weren't seeing any of that. We were seeing two people who were connected in such a way that was different than simply another Loki. Because we do meet other Lokis, and in fact, these two Lokis meet other Lokis, and there isn't that same connection. There isn't that same respect. This is a deep connection that the two of them have formed. And yes, I would say that it was romantic. I would say that the two of them love one another dearly, so much so they were willing to sacrifice themselves for one another if necessary. Yeah. And this really became problematic for some people. People online were arguing that this was incest, that somehow falling in love with yourself, even in another body, is somehow incestual. And I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that is the case. That's not how I took it. And Drea, maybe I'm entirely wrong. Maybe this is just the romantic philosopher in me, the person constantly looking for metaphors and similes. But what I saw was a case of a character, the Loki that we've always known, who was given an opportunity to fall in love with himself in a real way. It not in a way of that, as you were saying, the self-hatred that Loki carries with him. I would say that this was a character who began to respect himself, who began to see the error of his ways, who began to genuinely try to change things and do things correctly. And that requires, they say you can't love another until you love yourself. This required him to fall in love with himself. And so I saw it as a big metaphor. What did you think?
I definitely see her as a separate person with her own will, her own conscience, her
Oh,
own,
sure.
an
An entirely different history.
Yes. To the degree that they're not related, I see no familial connection there, right? So I'm trying to gain some understanding for where folks are coming from who are very upset by this.
Well, they're saying biologically she is the same. She's basically the same blood. She's the same being. She has the same parents. If nothing else, they're like brother and sister, except even closer because they are literally the same DNA.
Well, they can't be because she's
right
female.
Right.
And I see what you're saying. They share the same DNA. With, as I understand it, the variance of the universe also means that there's genetic variance. And so I'm not even sure that it's beside the point, but I'm not
I agree
confident that that's the case. And I totally agree with you that this is not so much about him and Sylvie as separate people. This may be more about him being able to recognize the complexity of himself. Because so if I may, even this version of Loki has what's considered a self-concept that's very rejection oriented, that he had experienced a tremendous amount of abandonment, rejection, lack of belonging, and he carried this narrative with him. And that's sort of what I believe participated or helped into the development of this personality. Somebody who is oftentimes very self-assured, composed, appears confident, but actually is very self-doubting and self-loathing. And when we see this what I would say, this pattern of personality, there's also these types of self-talk or distortions that underlie a lot of his behaviors. Feelings of, or thoughts of, I'm unlovable, I don't belong, I'll be alone forever, I'm invisible, and having to overcompensate those thoughts and those feelings with, therefore I must conquer, therefore I must threaten others, therefore, I'll attack you before you attack me, I'll betray you before you betray me. A lot of this is consistent with borderline personality disorder, which is a mental health condition, a personality disorder that is characterized by difficulties with regulating emotion, especially emotions in relating to other people. And so you see these really unstable relationships, inability to be close, difficulty tolerating rejection or painful interactions with others. And so you see, especially with Loki, but in general, people with borderline personality disorder can have this enduring pattern, this enduring quality of emotional instability. What Sylvie offers to him is exactly what you said. It's, what if I gain trust and connection to somebody who has these features? And then he realizes, he sees the qualities in her that he can love about himself. So in other words, he's going from this all or nothing black and white thinking. I'm a terrible person, I'm the best person. You're a terrible person, you're the best person. All this splitting thinking to more complex, realistic beliefs. So he sees qualities in her of courage and bravery, which he also has. He sees that she's witty and charming, which he also is. He sees that she's intelligent and cunning, which he also is. So all the things that he is attracted to in Sylvie are the things that he starts to really genuinely see in himself. And the flip side of that is also true. It means that he can tolerate some of the annoyances that he might not like about himself.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not as big and strong as Thor. Maybe I'm not as accommodating as other people. Maybe I have a different way of thinking. And Sylvie totally does. Sylvie is the exact definition of variant lifestyle, right? She's off on like literally creating her own path. She is literally divergent, and he's really appreciating that and beginning to find the care for himself, the self-compassion that involves the good things as well as the not so good things.
We actually see this a number of times over the course of the series, him seeing something within himself through her that is good, and he latches onto it, embraces it, and we genuinely watch him become a different person than the Loki we've always known.
Absolutely. There's this really meaningful scene that I found very touching, where they're in, it's the dimension that everyone goes to when they're pruned.
Oh, right.
I forgot what it was called, but they all go there, and most of the people they meet there are variant Lokis, because they've pruned so many of them. But that's
and the variant Lokis seem to be the only characters outside of Mobius who have figured out ways to avoid death.
Right, because they're
constant survivors.
Right. It's almost purgatory for them, and that's where pruned variants go to essentially get exterminated. And there they are, even surviving in that dimension.
Yeah, because they're survivors, just
absolutely
plain up and simple.
Yeah.
They will not let the Alioth take them because they survive. That's what they do.
And there is one moment where Sylvie is hard on herself. She's normally very brave, has her wits about her. She's usually very eager to scrap. She's usually very confident. And there's a moment where her and Loki are just sitting on a hill, and she starts to have doubts, and she starts to feel unsure. And she's also very uncertain about her own future. And Loki does something that's unlike him. He notices that she's fearful and she's actually cold, and he uses his magic to drape this green blanket over her. And of course we're thinking, maybe it's just me because I'm a psychologist, but I'm thinking this is Loki soothing himself. This is Loki finding in himself and appreciating and acknowledging, I'm scared.
Yeah.
I don't got it. I'm worried. I'm vulnerable. And he takes a moment to give compassion to himself.
Yes.
You're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. It's like almost giving himself affirmations and soothing himself. And that is a really nice moment in the series, because if you look at it from the perspective of, no, these are two different characters, one can say, look at Loki caring for another person. That's new. But you can also say, if you think about them as one,
Look at Loki caring for himself.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really nice touch.
In a genuine way, not in a he's only in it for himself. He is genuinely caring for himself.
And this is helpful for people who work with persons with borderline personality disorder, or have friends who have BPD, or family members who have BPD. This is so important. We have to remember that this is a huge struggle. Just self-compassion, self-tolerance, just being okay with oneself is hard work. And I appreciate that this show is telling us that is what Loki's problem is, plain and simple.
Yeah.
And that, and he's the hero of this story, plain and simple.
Yeah. I am always fascinated by how Marvel likes to throw us for a loop a little bit. I mean, you know that they are playing to the strengths of the fans' knowledge, and yet tweaking it ever so slightly so that even if we think we know what's going on, they are able to tell a completely different story from the comics. They don't just rehash what is available there in the material. For instance, when we find out that she's calling herself Sylvie, I think I, as well as however many millions of other fans out there that are watching this show on a weekly basis, instantly thought Sylvie Lushton, who was one of the incarnations of Enchantress, who, by the way, shares a number of the powers that Sylvie does in this TV series. But And I'll be curious to see if they try to play with this. I don't know how much I want to say for the listeners, just in case Sylvie Lushton starts to play a bigger role than we think in this first season. But I was happy to hear the name Sylvie, instantly think of a character and think I knew where it was going, only to then find out I had no idea where it was going, because they really kind of mixed Sylvie with Lady Loki, who's probably, in my opinion, and certainly in my limited reading of the Thor comics, but I did read a number of the Lady Loki stuff. I would say she's probably the worst of the Lokis that I can remember.
Wait, what do you mean the worst?
You know, being a lady makes you a really horrible person. I'm kidding. So Loki, there was a run where Loki's personality was put into a body that had been created for another character, so that another character could enter that. It was actually Sif. It was Lady Sif. So Loki took that body over. It was a female body, and that became known as Lady Loki. And as Lady Loki, Loki did more stuff to manipulate in such conniving ways. It got to a point where, if you're into the comics, it got to a point where Thor literally had to kill his own grandfather, the father of Odin, because of a lie that Loki had then, had started the whole thing out with. And then after Thor killed the grandfather, Loki used that against Thor to basically have Thor banished. Thor's off killing his own grandfather. And you're like, this is all your fault. So Lady Loki, I think, had some of the most dastardly driven schemes of any of the others that I had read. I certainly love the graphic novel series, or the comic series simply called Loki, which then I unfortunately had a hand in having renamed Thor and Loki Blood Brothers. That one, if people haven't read it, I highly recommend reading it, because it's Shakespearean. It's Loki has finally taken over Asgard. Thor is down in the dungeon, about to be executed the following day. And Loki's just basically waxing poetic to anyone who will listen about why he's still deserving of being the king of Asgard and why no one appreciates him. And I mean, it's really wonderfully done and beautifully painted. It's done with gouache painting. It's wonderfully done. But even that version of Loki, I wouldn't say is like Lady Loki is genuinely like evil. And so it was interesting. We're introduced to a Lady Loki, and I'm like, oh, this is a big deal. And we're also finding out that her name is Sylvie. And now we're learning throughout the course of the series that it's really just sort of they've taken these two things and they've turned it into something we didn't expect, which is a genuinely sympathetic character. That's an alternate version of this character that we've sort of grown to love and hate.
Well, and I think it works because we came into this story, I think many of us knowing that this would be Loki's opportunity to undo his misdeeds, to kind of to literally take a different path. And I think, we definitely need to talk about the ending of the show, but taking a different path, and in general, the concept of variance and the concept of timelines raises, I think, a lot of ideas for people. It raises our consciousness about simply being in the body we're in. And it's not to take meaning away from that, because I think that can be the first reaction, right? Wait, there's multiple variations and there's multiple timelines and possible branches, what...
Which I know it just killed you.
I mean, it's complicated, but yeah, time travel and timelines raise a lot of questions for me. But certainly, I think a lot of times our immediate reaction is, so why do I matter? But often with really good storytelling like this,
Yeah.
it really does come full circle to, but you being in your body is so special. Like your existence, your consciousness, your decision making, your control over yourself, your agency is magnificent. It's remarkable. And so here you are in this really complicated multiverse, being able to drive that. I think that's really energizing and powerful, and hopefully not disappointing and frustrating or even horrific for people who are discovering that all these changes are about to be made. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that last episode when things really kind of get distorted and unhinged.
It's literally the introduction to phase 4 of the MCU.
Yeah.
So Sylvie succeeds. Sylvie and Loki working together end up making their way all the way to the powers that be. They make their way to the timekeepers, only to find out that the timekeepers aren't even really a thing. They're sort of fabricated. So then
it's very Wizard of Oz, that moment, right?
Yes. Oh, totally.
They get into this big elaborate throne room and you see that they're just facades, that
literally like robot heads.
Yeah,
like robots.
It's frightening.
Yeah. So they then are pruned. They end up in the void. They then take on Eliath, sort of a big, if you think of the smoke monster from Lost, it's sort of this mechanical, smoky, cloudy dragon monster that will ultimately kill you. But the two of them have the ability to stop it and to get past it. And they go to what's called the Citadel at the end of time. Mm-hmm. And the Citadel at the end of time is a rundown, decrepit citadel where only one person remains. And that person is literally called He Who Remains. And we learn a significant amount of backstory from this character. He Who Remains was actually co-created by our dear friend Len Wein. Oh. Yeah. So this is a character who, again, is significantly different in the comics from sort of what they're presenting in the show. And I appreciate that they're kind of blending things together from the comics again. But He Who Remains was essentially the final director of the TVA and then created the Timekeepers. So the Timekeepers are then these beings that we know from this show. They were the three beings whose job it was to keep the timeline protected.
And I think what he tells Sylvie and Loki is a test of their trust in his own story, right? He's saying, if you destroy me, you're destroying this protective barrier.
Okay, so this is the part that I think is interesting, because I think I saw something online, and you and I were having a conversation with someone the other night who actually mentioned this character, and I find it really interesting. Now, I don't keep up with nerddom online that much. I don't like going to different websites and reading, here's what I think is happening, and all that stuff. I love non-spoilery stuff. I like being caught by surprise. Someone said that they believed that this character ultimately was Kang the Conqueror, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think that it's obvious that this is leading toward Kang the Conqueror. What I would argue is that I don't think the character that we know as He Who Remains is Kang. Mm-hmm. I think he is another character who is an alternate version of Kang called Immortus. And the reason I say that, and again, this is them sort of futzing around with the timeline in the comics. So in the comics, the 3 timekeepers bring Immortus in, and Immortus's job is to maintain this timeline. And that's literally what we are watching this character do by creating the TVA and making sure that these characters are pruned and then reconditioned to be agents and hunters and whatever. He then describes a war between his other versions, and this is where Kang comes in, right? So other versions of himself were at war with one another. He then won the war, and now he just sits there by himself and lives forever, kind of ruling over this kingdom, just constantly making sure that the universe stays on track.
And he has a way of describing this that creates uncertainty. We don't know if he's
crazy.
Truly, yeah, he could just kind of be whack and just saying this.
Been all by himself for a real long time, and
it's difficult. It's kind of a nice way to put us in a Loki state of mind. Like, I don't trust this person, and they're saying to me to trust them. Can you maybe play a part of what he says to give us a sample of this?
He came to kill the devil, right? Look, guess what? I keep you safe. And if you think I'm evil, well, just wait till you meet my variants.
So Loki and Sylvie are being asked to do something that's pretty tremendous. They're being asked to either keep things stable, which isn't stable for them, or to introduce a tremendous amount of chaos in order to self-preserve.
Yeah, you have the ability to get your revenge for yourself, or you have the ability to protect the universe of time.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
And I hear you saying revenge, but I think it's much more than that. It's to make a decision that will lead toward your self-preservation and your meaning and almost securing a place in this universe. If they don't do that, if Sylvie especially doesn't do that, then she continues to be meaningless. She continues to be this outlier.
Unless in this moment she becomes the ultimate hero by not killing
Well,
them.
and that's where Loki kind of comes in to establish the possibility that their existence together, their relationship might be sufficient. Like, is this fulfilling enough? Is this life that we have fulfilling enough to keep us from creating additional chaos?
Right. So what happens, Drea?
Well, doesn't work out for him, sadly.
She kills him. She kills him. And it ultimately opens the door to a bazillion different timelines, which is brilliant, because then I think that is where Kang comes in. I think we are then going to see Kang the Conqueror show up. He is one of the worst incarnations of this character, and he is ultimately who Immortus was keeping at bay.
Yeah.
Or if it's not Immortus, certainly He Who Remains was keeping at bay. And so I think we're going to see Kang the Conqueror as the new Thanos. This is going to be a really big deal. And I'm excited to see where it goes from here. But we watch as the timelines splinter and Loki is sent back to the real world, unable to do anything about it.
And this is heartbreaking on a number of levels. He's betrayed by Sylvie. Mm-hmm. And it's not a slight thing.
No.
She she disrupts their relationship, and she also escapes, right? She finds a wormhole or a dimensional portal, and she's out.
Yeah.
And he is alone. So here, you have to imagine, how can these are some of the thoughts that come to mind for me. How can Loki then, how does he not feel, again, rejected, abandoned, alone, unworthy, all these things that he's been struggling to get away from? She essentially creates this experience that confirms those things. But I want to transcend that one event to say that what he experienced with her nonetheless was meaningful, and that it's likely psychologically that he was able to develop really important assets emotionally: the ability to tolerate distress, the ability to trust others, the ability to give some of his to show vulnerability, some genuine complex feelings of himself that are not distorted, getting away from that all or nothing thinking. Really flexible cognitive beliefs that are much more mature and healthy. He gained so much from this that I'm refusing to believe that this act of betrayal sent him down a terrible emotional spiral.
That's what I want to know. I want to know from you, can he trust the feelings that he had? Can he trust the change that he actively made with himself over the course of the 6 episodes, now having been ultimately betrayed in the end? Do you think in season 2 or even further down the line of phase 4, I have no idea when we're going to see Loki and or Sylvie or even Kang the Conqueror. I don't know when we're going to see these characters again, but would you say that we are going to see a beaten down Loki, or do you think that this has now made him a true hero of his story who has been punched in the eye but will still bounce back?
I don't know that he ever can bounce back. I think that's something that's always going to be difficult for him. But I do feel like this experience and the experiences that he had contained within the series that we saw are additive, that they are experiences that continue to equip him with emotional knowledge and with intuition and with enough evidence to show that in some situations you can have bonds that are trusting, bonds that are reliable, reasons not to harm others. Mm-hmm. But essentially, we also have to go back to who Sylvie represents, right? And again, that's the bigger metaphor that I'll pull you along with me into this journey, if you will. That the bigger metaphor is even Loki, who has developed and matured, is going to continue to have times. He's going to be a Sylvie once in a while, meaning he's going to have a setback. He's going to have moments where he falls into loneliness, into rejection, into anger, into selfishness, because he's human. And that's what she did. So that's sort of what that represents for me, is the complexity and the multidimensional personality that's a part of Loki. So he's not going to be the perfect hero.
Yeah.
And now he's grappling with returning to this universe and to the TVA where no one really knows him, because it's all another variation.
Yeah, that's the big twist at the end. They have no idea what has just happened.
And that's also kind of like a double, a double whammy, because
he's now been abandoned by everyone.
Yeah, Mobius is like, I don't know who you are. And that's got to be disappointing and saddening for him.
Yeah. What I love is that this has now opened this door. So we also now have a brand new TV series on Marvel, or on Disney Plus, which is Marvel's What If, which is essentially every episode. It's a half-hour animated episode that shows you an alternate reality. So the first episode is, what if Captain America didn't receive the super serum, or what if Steve Rogers didn't receive the super serum? What if it was Peggy Carter instead? Then there was, it's based on a series of comics, but we are now getting to see basically what has happened because this new timeline exists. We get to see all these alternate realities, all being looked over by the Watcher. And so that's awesome. And then I know that the new trailer for Spider-Man just dropped the other day, officially. And we get to see that there's some timeline issues there. And we get, I know that Ant-Man is going to deal with sort of quantum stuff. And I know that Doctor Strange is going to deal with some, multiple realities and all that. So all of this is a result of this finale and this pivotal moment in the Loki series. And I got to tell you, I'm here for it. I love it. I want to see more. What about you? Are you excited?
I'm really energized by it. I think, and I'm starting to read more Marvel comics. As you know, right now I'm reading Civil War by Mark Miller. And I'm learning that Marvel takes risks and they do a whole lot of interesting things. I'm just like constantly asking you, wait, this person's a robot now and this is a clone, and it's just really wild. But what I love about the era that we're in right now is that it does bring in so much psychology, and the whole concept, of course, of the multiple dimensions and the multiple variants is about us trying to figure out who we are, essentially, right? I don't think I'm stretching with this, that in order to navigate and understand and make our way through these dimensions, it means we really have to have groundedness about what makes us who we are.
Yeah.
And as we follow these characters, what makes those characters solidly who they are. So when you see T'Challa in the role of Star-Lord, you see what version of Star-Lord is actually hugely a part of T'Challa's wisdom and groundedness and compassion. Same with Peggy Carter. When we see her as Captain America, we see what she brings to that character. And so it uplifts a ton of interesting and important facets of the people we are. And I find that to be like really valuable as we have these conversations.
And if anyone is wondering, if they haven't seen the episodes yet, most of the voice cast for the Marvel's What If are the stars of the MCU. So a lot of them came back. Some of them didn't, but a lot of them have come back to voice their roles. So it's always exciting to hear these characters that we've grown with over all this time, and now see them in completely different ways, voiced by the same people. I love it.
I love it too. I love that we're transcending a lot of things that tend to be seen as fixed, right? The wiring of our brains, our individual bodies, our relationships. Like, it's playing around with that, and it's pushing us a little bit further to be much more sophisticated about how we think of ourselves and our relationships.
Drea, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
They can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or on social media. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me online. I'm at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. Find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Come find us on Facebook. And as always, follow our good family over at Fanbase Press. And we have a brand new subscriber to our Patreon, Zach Neal. Welcome. He joined the tier that gets him one of our exclusive challenge coins. If you haven't seen the challenge coins, you should go visit our social media or come to Patreon. It is a hefty piece of metal challenge coin that has you and me on one side, Drea, with the Arkham Sessions logo, and on the back has an image of our favorite vigilante with he's doing the best with what he's been given, written along the side. It's a wonderful coin. We still have some.
And those will not be reprinted. So
that is correct.
Those are one of a kind. I'll also add for folks who are like me and tend to be a little bit DC leaning, we will return to cover the Batman universe. In fact, I believe in the next few weeks, we'll be talking about Suicide Squad.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. As a patron, you will get exclusive access for a certain period of time to the Suicide Squad, and you voted to have us cover the 2-part Long Halloween. So we will be covering all of those exclusively for our patrons for a limited time before they go out to the public. So go check us out. You could get to hear a lot more. Until next time, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
That's the gambit.